I did everything but go to a doctor. I don't go to the doctors. I don't like the doctors. But I don't go to doctors. I don't like doctors. I don't like doctors, sort of. I've never been to a doctor. I don't like doctors because I don't like doctors. Should I have gone to the doctors? Sure, but I don't like the doctors. I used to think doctors were the people you were supposed to trust the most, the ones that were supposed to help you at your most vulnerable. But what happens when the person you think you trust the most is the one that ends up hurting you? This isn't an easy story for me to tell, but it is one that I think is very important. And it may be long, but I think I only have it in me once to tell this story, so I'll give myself as long as it takes. Today, I'm going to be telling you about the truth of why I hate doctors and how one experience caught up to me more than a decade later and ended up in me going to a mental institution for 10 weeks. Here's the story. So first, we're gonna have to go way back into my history because I do have a long history of hating doctors, and it actually started out pretty young. Now, I come from a family where we don't go to the doctors unless absolutely necessary. My dad specifically is one of those people where it's like, unless a bone is protruding out of your body or there's clearly a broken bone inside of you, he's not taking you to the doctor. You can put some ice on it, rub some dirt in it, and you're fine. It wasn't until, I kid you not, 2 weeks later that I'm still complaining to my dad about my ankle. And he goes, okay, fine, let's go to the doctor. God. So rude. But when I did go, I never really liked doctors. You know, as a kid, they give you shots and make you cry. And as an adult, they just assume you know everything about health insurance and co-pays when you don't. And tangent. So I did end up going to the doctor for the first time in like 12 years recently, and I got some blood work done, and after my appointment, they're like, okay, you owe $60 for your copay. And I'm like, okay, cool, sweet. Okay, for your follow-up appointment, do you want us to call you or do you want to come back in? And I was like, well, of course, just call me just for my results, that's fine. So they call me, they give me my results, and I was like, okay, cool. Then they call me back and they're like, hey, it's a $60 copay for your doctor's appointment. And I was like, for the phone call? I still have to pay? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, well, I don't have my debit card right now, so I'll pay in a couple of days. So in a couple of days, they go, hey, you still have to pay your copay and you have to do it in person. And I was like, I have to do it in person? Why would you give me the option of a phone call appointment if I still have to go in and pay $60 for a 30-second phone call? So that's what I mean by me not liking health insurance and all the doctor bureaucracy. Anywho. But when I was young, I don't remember it personally, I was about 4 years old, I actually ended up breaking my collarbone, and when my parents finally decided to take me to the hospital, that was another weird thing about the doctors being really sketchy. The doctors are looking at my father, who is a black man with these two very light-skinned daughters. Before you know it, there is an official who would like to speak to my father, and yes, this official was from the Child Protective Services, who just kind of briefly questioned my father. Now, it wasn't some big interview. They didn't come and like investigate or like talk to us kids. It was kind of just like a, hey, something fishy's going on here, what's going on? So calling CPS on my dad is not a great start, medical field. But the first time I ever really hated doctors was when I was 14 years old with my pediatrician, Dr. Ambrose. And yes, I'm using his real name because he's probably retired and maybe even dead for all I know, so I don't care if he gets a bad rep for this. Now, I loathed this guy because he was, how should I put it? An asshole? I thought he was just a plain jerk. My mom says, no, he just has a dry sense of humor, but like, I don't know, it's like drier than eating saltine crackers in the Sahara Desert, because this guy, he didn't have a bad bedside manner, he had like a bedside grudge. He was just a jerk. And I'm not the only one who thinks so, because here's some Yelp reviews about this guy, because you know I'm not alone. This person says, terrible bedside manner, condescending attitude, and with a holier-than-thou God complex. This one says, the more he treated my child, the more I disliked him. He was never professional in the way he talked to me or even my family. I didn't mind at first being a sarcastic person myself, but it got to a point where he was unprofessional as a doctor. He just never showed compassion. And then lastly, but his bedside manners and his condescending attitude leaves a lot to be desired. It's not like I didn't give him a chance. This was my 4th visit. He is so full of himself, it was almost comical. I personally will not be returning. Were there more positive reviews than negative? Sure. but that doesn't help my thesis. So needless to say, I did absolutely everything in my power to avoid seeing this guy. But when I was about 13 or 14 years old, I stopped getting my period and I thought something was wrong. Now, I was a very early bloomer, so I had gotten my period way early and it just all of a sudden stopped. And so I do my research, I start doom scrolling, and I'm like, uh-oh, I think there's a problem with my ovaries, Mom. I need to go to the doctors. And she was like, no, like it's probably not that serious. And I was like, no, the internet says I need to go see a gynecologist, but I can't just go directly. So we got to go get a referral from the one and only Dr. Ambrose. And so even though I was 14 years old, I had to go to my pediatrician because I didn't have an adult doctor. And it's weird because I actually have a photo from this very day because my mom and I just thought it was so funny because they were playing Lion King in the waiting room and then we go into the actual exam room. And you know, there's like teddy bears dressed up as firemen on the paper that you lay down on. And there's gummy bears and lollipops lined up. Like it was a children's office. And here I am like a nearly grown adult sitting in there. So Dr. Ambrose walks in and immediately just starts shaming me for being there, telling me I'm too old to be there and like giving me bad vibes. So like not off to a great start. And then for just like the general questionnaire portion, he starts asking me like really inappropriate, uncomfortable questions. So again, I'm 14 years old and one of the questions he asks me, he goes, have you ever heard of a rainbow party? And I was like, no. And he goes, oh, it's where a guy puts a condom on and see how many shades of lipstick he can get around it at the party. That is literally what he said to me, a teenager. Like, what a disgusting thing to say. And I remember my mom laughed. She giggled because she's like, haha, Dr. Ambrose, you're so funny. And I'm like, what the frick frack, my guy? That is the most inappropriate thing you can say right now. So I'm just like frozen because I don't want to laugh, but I don't want to interact with this guy. And he does like whatever physical exam he does. He then tells me, okay, I have your results. And I'm like, my results of what? I just need a referral to go to the gynecologist. But okay, what are my results? What he said next has impacted me for my whole life that I actually think I made a video about it 3 years ago. Here's what he said. My doctor said, all right, so the results of your physical are that you are fat and pussy. And I'm a 13-year-old girl, you know, like a teenager in middle school. And I was like, what? And he said I had really bad acne and that I was extremely overweight. I was 160 pounds when I was like 13 years old. And he said, you need to lose weight and start eating better because you're fat and pussy. And he used those exact words. And it's still such a defining thing because I very clearly remember it as that kind of being the very start to a lot of my body image issues, where if my doctor is telling me those things about my physical appearance, then maybe my physical appearance is a much bigger deal than what I thought it would be. In that moment when he called me fat and pussy, I cannot underline how much that comment affected me for the rest of my life. And it's weird because it was kind of a joke in my family for a really long time because, again, like we all thought Dr. Ambrose was so funny and like, haha, he called you fat and pussy. But as a 14-year-old girl going through puberty, going through all like her ugly duckling phase in a sense, to be told that was so devastating. So much of my self-worth was tied to my weight. I still have a lot of weight issues to this day, a lot of insecurities.
I think this is affecting me mentally. Like long-term shit, it's gonna fuck with me. If I could paint the sky.
You guys didn't get ranch?
I cannot encourage you guys to love your body when the records show that my whole life I've never been able to love my own. And all I wanted was just a referral. I didn't need all that, just send me to the gynecologist. And he was trying to tell me like, you're probably fine, you just got your period early, like this happens, sometimes it just stops. And I had to like fight and be like, no, I think something's wrong. Like I know my body, I don't go to the doctor, so when something's wrong, I know it. Please just give me a referral just for peace of mind. So I got my referral, I go to the gynecologist, and lo and behold, I was right. I had a cyst on my ovary at 14 years old and it was blocking my fallopian tubes and I couldn't get my period. And it was then that I actually started my lifelong struggles with my ovaries because over the next several years, I had regular doctor's appointments. I had to get ultrasounds every few months just to make sure that these cysts weren't arriving again. I was put on birth control at 14 years old and I haven't stopped taking it even at the ripe age at 31. And it was kind of like the start to all of my medical problems, but I remember very vividly like it started with Dr. Ambrose and ruining my body image for forever. So fast forward a few years where I'm out on my own and off to college.
When I was 18 years old, I started to have some pain in my lower abdomen. I have a history of ovarian cysts, so I kind of suspected that this was the problem.
And if you recall from previous videos, I again have a very high pain tolerance. Insanely high pain tolerance.
Really high pain tolerance.
I'm impervious to pain. So when I feel pain and I know something's wrong, like I know, okay, shoot, this is an emergency, I should probably go to the doctor. I saw this one clip on TikTok talking about Mark Ruffalo and how he had something kind of similar.
We don't talk enough about how Mark Ruffalo years ago had a dream, and he says the dream wasn't visuals, it wasn't a voice, it was just pure knowledge, and the knowledge said, you have a brain tumor, you need to go get it checked out immediately. And he was filming a movie at the time, so he went on set and he spoke to the doctor on set and he said, look, I know it's crazy, but last night I had a dream and it just told me that I had a brain tumor. It's pretty weird, right? And the doctor on set said, oh, you should probably just go check it out just to be safe. So next day he went to check it out. He went to the doctor, he got a scan, and he had a brain tumor. He had a brain tumor. So the doctors took it out and he was fine. But if it weren't for that dream, he would be dead.
Yeah, so I had the same thing where I'm just so in tune with my body. I know when it's about to crash out on me, I guess. So I knew it was my ovary and I knew the process. I needed to get an ultrasound. But since I was in college and far away from home, I couldn't just go to my regular gynecologist. So I knew I had to go to the campus gynecologist, get a referral, and go to the nearest hospital for an ultrasound. I've been through this before, I know the process, that's just how it's gonna work. So I go to my campus gynecologist, and it was the wackiest appointment I had ever had. Now, mind you, I'd been going to the gynecologist for years at this point, and this appointment was unlike any one I had ever been to. And I remember at the time when that appointment ended, I called my mom and I was like, Mom, this guy's a quack. Like, that was such an abnormal doctor's appointment. And my mom on the phone was being like, well, you know, it's college. It might be a little different. You know, things might work a little differently there. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. I can't worry about this quack of a doctor because I have bigger things to worry about. And I was right because I finally got my referral, went to go get an ultrasound, and lo and behold, I was correcto again. There was a big ass cyst on my ovary. And that doctor told me, okay, well, you have to go back home and get surgery on this because you're gonna need a big old surgery. And I was like, oh, great. Also, side note, I already did a full story time on the whole ovary tumor situation, so you can go back and watch that in full if you wanted to. You can also go back and watch all of my story times if you're new here. Go and catch up. But because I already have a video of it and it's kind of already part of my lore, I'll be brief about it here, but if you've seen that video, I also might be repeating something, so just keep that in mind. Anyway. But one thing I never went into detail about in that video was my hometown gynecologist who performed this surgery. So he was fine for the years I had been regularly seeing him, but he proved to be extremely unhelpful when it came to this life-changing surgery that I was about to have. That's because when they found this cyst, I went to the campus cafeteria and I would just sit there for hours, doom scrolling, researching, finding out everything I could about all the possibilities that could happen from this surgery. And so in all of my pre-op appointments, I was asking him all of these questions. I was like, okay, is it cancerous? Is this gonna be a laparoscopic surgery or a laparotomy? Will I end up needing a hysterectomy? Should I prepare for surgical menopause? Can I still have children? Should I start considering freezing my eggs? I had all these burning questions because this was gonna be a big surgery. And he wasn't answering them at all. He just kept telling me like, don't worry, everything's gonna be fine, but wouldn't answer anything I was asking. And I'm in college, so I'm asking him, how long will I be on bed rest? How much time should I take off of school? Do I need to drop out completely? And he just kept going like, don't worry about it. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. Ugh, that doesn't help me. So I finally have my surgery, and instead of the laparoscopic laser one, I had the big one. And my doctor comes into the room and he tells me this. You had a tumor the size of a grapefruit. Yeesh. And because of that, we had to remove the tumor, your ovary, and a fallopian tube. Yeesh 2.0. Oh baby, that was a softball inside of me. A softball that was encompassing one of my organs. That's insane. So naturally, I had 1,000,002 follow-up questions after my surgery, especially because he told me that it had skin and teeth cells, which qualifies it as a tumor. And so hearing the word tumor, you know, that's alarm bells going off. So I'm asking, like, was it cancerous? Am I at risk for this happening again? Am I at risk for cancer? Did I eat my twin in the womb? And over the past couple of years, my hormones had been fluctuating to a point where I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Was this going to keep happening? In my research, it says that people who have this surgery are at a higher risk for early death. Am I going to die early? Am I going to get cancer? Am I more likely to develop infections? And again, my doctor's just like, chill, don't worry. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Just stop worrying. And I'm like, my brother in Christ, I'm going to be worrying about this for the next 2 decades. Please give me something. So I had to figure out the whole process on my own. I spent several days in the hospital. I had to reteach myself how to walk. I was on bed rest for several weeks. I missed so much school that I almost had to drop out for the semester. And he didn't even go over any aftercare after the surgery because my stitches would just dissolve and then I'd be okay. But I was not okay because for the next 10 years, I dealt with painful pelvic floor issues as a result of not healing correctly. I've gotten numerous infections and insane hormone balances, and he never warned me about any of them and just kind of let me to my own devices to figure it out. But I think the hardest thing, kind of dealing with all this on my own, was the mental health toll it really took on me because I felt like I lost my womanhood. I was 18 years old, losing a major organ, and it really affected me more than I ever could have imagined. Could anyone ever understand what it feels like to lose something so intimate, something so connected to the idea of being a woman, of creating life, of being me? I didn't know how to explain the grief I carried. It wasn't just about my body, it was about my identity. I feel so different from everyone else, from myself. And I just started hating college. I never really adjusted well, and I kind of just dissociated through it all completely. I never really made any friends, joined any clubs, and I don't know, I didn't do anything. And it's strange because I don't have any memories of college. I just remember the overall feeling that I hated it and that it was single-handedly one of the worst periods in my life. All throughout my college years, my mom kept saying, send me photos, send me photos. And I knew it was for this scrapbook, and I didn't have photos. I didn't have any memories from college, and she kept begging me, take photos with your roommates, go to events and send me photos, like I need content. And I didn't have any for her. This page kind of breaks my heart because I made so many few friends that my mom made this page and put my family's faces on the bodies of students because I didn't have one of my own. It's a beautiful scrapbook, but I think it perfectly encapsulates my college experience because I only went to college for class and I only ever hung out with my family and I didn't make any friends. And this shows that. I just felt so sad and alone and hopeless, helpless. I lost sight of anything good. And I didn't think all that would happen from losing my ovary, but it did. I blamed my doctor and I blamed my school. And I ended up graduating in 3 years because I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And sadly, I also blamed myself, but more on that another time. So this attitude was already existing in my mind, but then one day I got a letter in the mail and it would alter the course of my life and truly solidify why I hated doctors. So I get a letter in the mail one day about a class action lawsuit against the gynecologist at USC, which is where I went to college.
Breaking news now at noon. New developments in the sex abuse case at USC. The former university doctor accused of molesting hundreds of women has just been arrested.
In fact, the district attorney released the charges just a few minutes ago. In part, they are 18 counts of sexual abuse 11 counts of sexual battery by fraud. 16 women involved, all USC students or former USC students. And these allegations and these charges go back as early as 2009, as recent as 2016.
So you remember right before I had my ovary surgery, how I just needed to go to my campus gynecologist for a simple referral? It was that gynecologist, Dr. Tyndall. He was being accused of assaulting, abusing, and sexually harassing his female patients over the course of 3 decades while at USC. And in this letter, it said anybody who had ever visited him, ever even had an appointment with him, would be considered Tier 1 in the class action lawsuit and receive $2,500, no questions asked. Tier 2 allowed any class members to submit a written form, really tell their story about what happened and the impact on them and how it may have harmed them. And if their story was good enough, they would essentially be rewarded a higher dollar amount. And if their story was significant enough, they would be automatically bumped to Tier 3, where if they felt comfortable, they could do an in-person interview and additional written forms about their experience with him and how it impacted them. Then, with all class action lawsuits, there was the option to completely pull out of the lawsuit and sue separately. So instead of them doing all the work, you kind of have to hire your own lawyer and go through that legal process on your own. So immediately after reading this letter, I remember thinking like, hell yeah, like I'm gonna make some money because I remember everything about that appointment and how much of a quack that doctor was. And I truly thought to myself like, nice, I'm gonna get a little payout right here. I can treat myself to some of the finer things in life, like Taco Bell twice a week. And I remember so much about that appointment because it was right before the next 4 years became a blur. Like it was the last that I remember of college. And so I was like, I'm gonna have a pretty good story to tell. And so right away I asked my dad, I said, Dad, should I do the class action or should we sue separately? And he was the one to kind of like assuage me and be like, I don't think you want to go through the hassle of a lawsuit. Like it might impact your mental health. It might drag out a lot. Like I just don't think it would be worth it. And he was absolutely right because the thought alone of any type of legal confrontation was enough to send me into a panic.
I'm a very non-confrontational person.
Because I hate confrontation. I am not good at confrontation. But mustering up the courage to be confrontational is hard. You guys want me to yell at my landlord? I can't even send my food back when a restaurant gets it wrong. I'll just eat it. I won't say anything. I don't like confrontation. I got so many comments and DMs saying that I could sue and that I should sue for a lot of money.
Hospital for an ultrasound, because that's kind of what I had to do in the past.
I truly don't want to sue. I don't want to go through a lawsuit. I don't want to have to figure it out. And I just didn't have the mental fortitude to even deal with a lawsuit right now. I had no strength to do this. So I decided to go with the class action and I signed up for this special portal that they had for all class members. I filled out my written complaint and then I kind of just forgot about it. So this whole process started in July of 2019 and I didn't hear back until March of 2020, so almost 8 months later. And tangent, but I've actually been a part of several class action lawsuits because I was in the service industry for many years and they don't like giving you breaks. And I actually did a whole rant video on my channel about why I hated working for the Cheesecake Factory. But a couple years ago, I got a letter from the Cheesecake Factory and it was a check for a couple $100s. Because apparently they were violating all of our breaks at the Cheesecake Factory. And I hadn't worked there since 2017. So yeah, I was aware that these things take quite some time. All right, back to the point. So in March, I get a letter back from the settlement, again, kind of completely forgot about it. And it said that I was automatically bumped up to Tier 3 right away. And it wasn't until that moment that I thought, oh shit, this is kind of serious. And so they gave me the option to stay in Tier 2 and not have to do any more paperwork or interviews. But if I wanted to stay in Tier 3, I had to agree to do a longer complaint form and an in-person interview with somebody they called the special master, which I really don't like that term, but I would have to talk to the special master. But if you recall, in March 2020, something crazy happened where the world shut down as a result of the coronavirus. I don't know if YouTube still flags that as a word. Actually, this whole video is probably getting flagged, so what do I care about? So the interviews were moved to telephone calls, and I was relieved because if I had to go in person and tell my story, I would probably fall apart. But sobbing into a telephone while in my pajama pants sounded okay, so silver linings. So I opt in, and my phone appointment isn't scheduled until August, basically almost a full year after this whole thing started, which again is normal for class action lawsuits. But during that whole year, I kind of really started festering on my appointment and really started honing in on, oh, maybe something bad actually did happen to me. I thought I just had a silly, wacky story, but the more I think about it, the more I started realizing that I was sexually assaulted during my appointment. And so my interview time comes up, I get on the phone with the special master, and I tell my story. So the special master asks me to simply walk them through the appointment, what happened in general. And I go through all the tidbits, you know, like, oh, I had a pain in my side, I knew I needed a referral to go get an ultrasound, so I go to him and all I needed was a referral. So I scheduled an appointment with the gynecologist on campus and went there. Dr. Tyndall comes into the room, asks me what's wrong. I tell him about my history of cysts and that all I need is just a referral to go to the hospital for an ultrasound. And I remember right away during this questionnaire part, he started asking me some of the most inappropriate questions I had ever heard. Things that were like very advanced sexual experiences type of thing. I can't repeat them, but it felt so violating and so medically unnecessary, and it took me right back to my days with Dr. Ambrose. And so that feeling of like disgust and distrust was immediate off the bat with my appointment with him. So at this appointment, the gynecologist essentially tried to convince me it was an appendicitis because it was lower abdomen pain on my right side. I had to explain, nah, dude, trust me, it's my ovary. Like, I know my body. I know I have this kind of history of issues. It's my ovary. The next step would be to send me to the hospital to get an ultrasound. And I basically had to convince him of it. That's a whole other story on itself. So yeah, right side pain might be an appendicitis, even though I knew it was my ovary. But I just kept thinking, if you thought it was an appendicitis, why are you asking me all those sexually charged questions? But then I had to kind of calm myself down and be like, well, it's college, JC. You know, people are becoming sexually active during this age, and some of those things might be important for STDs or other types of infections that, okay, maybe considering the environment that I am in, that might be normal. And so he told me he would need to perform some exams to rule out an appendicitis. And I agreed. And side note, the remaining video might be a little upsetting. And I thought about keeping the details vague, but they felt important. And especially hearing them from the victim itself, I don't know, I felt inclined to tell you all this. But if you are at all triggered by sexual abuse, or if you find this type of content overwhelming, I understand, and please click off now. But if that works for you, then let's get back to the story. So he proceeded to perform a full body examination. And the very first thing that stuck out to me was that there was no nurse in the room. I've been going to the gynecologist for years. I've had numerous appointments, and there was always a nurse in the room or a second person in the room. And there was nobody else in the room when he started performing these exams. And again, I just kind of chalked it up to, it's college. Maybe they're short-staffed, or maybe you got to put more trust in your gynecologist. And so the rules are a little bit different here. So just kind of calming myself down with that. But I remember his hands were cold and the pressure was hard, and it was more painful than any other exam that I had had before. And I just kept thinking, like, why is he doing all this if he thought it was an appendicitis? Why is he doing all this when all I'm asking for is a referral, where these tests aren't going to show it, the ultrasound is for? What is all this for? And so as I'm talking to the special master, I say, yeah, and right after the appointment, I called my mom and I said, my gynecologist was so creepy and he didn't even know what he was doing. She tried to, you know, confirm that maybe it was just college, that sort of thing. I then tell her about how I had bigger things to worry about than that appointment with Dr. Tyndall, because I went on to find an ovary cyst and that I was going to have surgery and possibly drop out of school. That all of that became such an afterthought with these bigger things that I was dealing with. So as I'm talking to the special master, which again, I really don't like that term, I told her more beyond that appointment, because I really felt like my whole experience started there, but it's where the trauma that happened afterwards that really affected me. I described my subsequent surgery, how it led me down a awful path of depression, how I isolated from family, friends, and any type of campus life. And I described how the duration of my time at USC was one of the worst times of my life. My grandpa went to USC. And when I got into USC, he gave me this hat. When I got in, he was so proud of me, and he said, "Going to USC were the best days of my life. You're gonna love it." And I don't know, I feel like I kind of failed him. And that I didn't have the experience that you're supposed to have. And I think this shows that I left college with no friends, an insane amount of debt, and no memories. I was telling her how this lawsuit dragging for more than a year was super triggering because it kept bringing me down to that mindset of one of the worst periods of my life. Not only that, but during the course of this lawsuit, it was revealed that USC knew about Dr. Tyndall, and they admitted to covering it up.
We have some pictures of the doctor. He, of course, has been a very controversial figure since USC admitted that for a number of years they kept these allegations under wraps and then they came clean. The doctor had since been fired. There's a $215 million federal lawsuit that is now pending.
They had received numerous complaints from many female patients of his, and they did nothing. And worse than doing nothing, they covered it up. And so to find out during this lawsuit that, oh my God, like, I think I was sexually assaulted, but also my school, my safe space, did nothing to protect us, did nothing to protect the women of that campus, and were instead actively complicit in covering it up. I hated going to USC, and now I had a reason to hate them because they let me get sexually assaulted. And so I finished telling my story, and I remember it was quiet for a minute, and then I just hear this big, heavy sigh on the other end of the phone. And she goes, "JC, I'm so sorry for what happened to you." And I'd been very stoic up until this point. I probably didn't show any emotion in my voice other than like anger and being pissed off. But then the follow-up questions started where she asked me to go into more detail. And she goes, "You mentioned that his hands were cold." And I was like, "Yeah, I remember his hands being really cold." And she said, "So he wasn't wearing gloves?" And I went, "Phew. Yeah, I guess not. That's bad, isn't it?" "Yeah, that's bad." She asked me if he removed and reinserted his fingers ever. And I said, "Yeah, a couple of times, because I remember that's why it hurt. I remember feeling pressure and his hands were cold and it hurt." "That's bad, isn't it?" And she responded, "That probably wasn't medically necessary." And I never made that connection until that point, that that's what happened. And the more follow-up questions she asked me, the more clarity that I got that something serious happened in that room. Because then she asked, "Did he insert any instruments inside of you?" And I said, "Yeah, he said he needed to get an internal look to see if it was my ovaries. You know, if anything, I considered it like a mini ultrasound. I don't know my medical technology." She asked how long he used that instrument, and I told her, "I don't know, a long time. I remember it hurt." And she asked, "Did he use a speculum before performing this?" And I said, "No, he didn't, because the speculum was always my least favorite thing in any gynecologist appointment. And that's probably why the instrument he used hurt, because he just kind of shoved it in, I guess." She informed me that a digital penetration is almost never medically necessary, and if it were, a speculum would have been used, and that if digital contact were made, it wouldn't last more than a few seconds. But that clearly wasn't the case. And I remember she took another heavy sigh and just said, "I'm sorry." She then asked if I ever saw a camera in the room. And I said, no, I don't think so. She goes, you didn't see any type of cameras, or he didn't ask to take any pictures of you? And I said, no, he did not. And I later learned that the reason she asked that question was because they found a storage unit of Dr. Tyndall's with hundreds of nude photos of his female patients in the exam room. And I don't think I was one of those photos. But I don't know. I don't know. She asked me a few more questions that didn't apply to me necessarily. And then I remember I didn't cry until we hung up the phone. And it wasn't until I hung up the phone that I realized, oh, that was the first time I ever said any of that out loud. It was also the first time I was being validated that what happened in that room was wrong. But it was also the first time that I realized everything that had happened to me. And I was numb for a while because I just kept replaying that appointment with a new perspective. This was almost 10 years later that I had that phone call from the initial appointment that I had with Dr. Tyndall. And so 10 years later, I'm learning that I was sexually assaulted. And all I ever wanted from my doctors was just a referral and to answer my questions. And all I ever got from them was trauma. So it was Easter Day of the next year that I got a letter from my settlement. And I didn't know how much I'd be awarded. I didn't know where I fell in that tier 3 of class members. So I assumed this letter was going to explain everything and, tell me more details or any type of next steps. But it wasn't a letter, it was a check. So there was no follow-up, no explanation, no statement from USC. It was a check with the biggest number I had ever seen. And it was in one of the highest amounts for tier 3 members. And it was that moment that I learned that I was one of his worst victims. And my family surrounded me, and we were all looking at the check with our jaws dropped. And I had never told my family any specifics about what happened in that appointment. I was very vague. And so they're also kind of seeing that number and realizing, oh my God, something happened to you. And all I wanted to do was rip that check up. All I wanted to do was burn it, get rid of it. I wanted nothing to do with it. It's hard to describe that pain with it when you have family members telling you, oh my gosh, you should invest in property, or you should treat yourself to a nice little vacation, or, buy yourself something to ease the pain. And I remember I was very casually dating this one guy, and I told him the amount. And he looked at me and he said, whoa, I wish I was sexually assaulted. But I didn't want any of it. I didn't want the ghost of my abuser paying for anything. I didn't want to celebrate like I won the lotto when it felt like I lost so much of me. And I thought, okay, maybe I can use this responsibly. Maybe I could use it to help fund my career in the entertainment industry, to pay for my lifestyle while I try to build a career out here in LA. But it just made me sick to my stomach, thinking, how could I let him fund any type of success? There's a strange weight that comes with holding something you never asked for. When I think about that money, I feel as though I'm pulling bricks from a house I didn't want to build, one that was constructed from the ashes of my pain. Why would I want my success tied to the darkest chapter of my life? There's no conversion of pain into currency, and I can't let him have a hand in the life I'm so desperately trying to build because of him. He took something from me that day, and it was something that I could never get back. He was a phantom that would haunt my forevers and torment my peace. And no dollar amount could ever compensate for how much this experience burdened me. And so I let the check sit in my drawer for 5 weeks. I couldn't touch it, couldn't look at it. I just wanted to burn it. I thought about donating it. I thought about just giving it away to family. It felt like the worst case of my shadow brains personified into a check that I didn't want. But after 5 weeks, I mustered up the courage to deposit it. I got a financial planner and I told her, just watch this money for me, invest it, keep it safe, but I don't want to know anything about it. I don't want to know what stocks you're putting it into, the Dow Jones or the Wall Street terminology that I don't care about. I don't want to hear it. If you want to put it in a Roth IRA, cool, works for me. I don't want to have to think about this money for 10 more years. And maybe then I'll be ready to touch it. But for right now, just keep it locked away. And then something odd happened after this experience, because a few months later, we found out the results of the women who pulled out of the class action lawsuit and decided to sue on their own separately. The women who sued separately were awarded settlement amounts in the millions of dollars. And I felt sick to my stomach because I was like, oh, that's a life-changing amount of money. I'd be okay with spending a little bit of a couple $1 million, you know, I'd be fine giving that away to family and it wouldn't haunt me as much. You know, I could recover a little bit in the sense if I had millions of dollars. And I remember being so mad, thinking like, I knew I should have sued separately. I would have gotten so much money. Like, oh, like I ruined everything. I ruined my life because I didn't go for the higher amount. And I just kept thinking like, JC, you couldn't even deposit the check that you did get. Why would this be any different? And in hindsight, I could say I'm still happy with my choice of going with the class action, because that alone, with me not even having to be involved in a lawsuit, was so mentally taxing that I'm glad my dad talked me out of it, because I don't think I could have handled a full-on lawsuit. I just wanted to forget everything about this whole experience for forever. So this was one of the biggest college scandals in the history of college scandals, and I was a part of it. I was one of the worst victims of it. But sadly, there were still hundreds and hundreds of other women who were impacted by this.
The University of Southern California will pay more than $1 billion to settle lawsuits over alleged sex crimes committed by a campus gynecologist. More than 700 women have sued George Tyndall. The university will pay the women a total of $852 million. That combined with an earlier settlement of $215 million, bringing that total amount to more than $1.1 billion. Tyndall is charged with multiple sex crimes and could be sentenced up to 64 years in prison if found guilty.
18,000 women were part of the Tier 1 class members and received $2,500. 710 women were in Tiers 2 and 3 and were rewarded amounts that reached up to $852 million. $215 million was also awarded in other federal lawsuits. In total, USC agreed to pay $1 billion to former female patients of Dr. George Tyndall for sexual abuse and assault. Tyndall was arrested in 2019 and was charged with multiple counts of sexual abuse. He pled not guilty and awaited trial. It was the biggest sex abuse payout in the history of higher education. And I think overall, when I think about my feelings towards this whole experience, unfortunately, one of the worst feelings that I felt was just this overwhelming sense of guilt. I had been to the gynecologist for several years. I knew how appointments were supposed to go, and I knew that appointment was wrong in so many ways. And I would look at my lawsuit check and think, I could have saved so many other girls. I should have been the one to call and report him because I knew something was wrong. I should have been the whistleblower, and I could have helped prevent hundreds of other girls from getting abused as well. And I know I had bigger things to worry about because I would go on to lose an entire organ, but I, at this time, just felt entirely responsible for everything that happened. I carried that weight on myself. And I've recently been to a lot of therapy for that guilt, but more on that from future JC. But then I just couldn't handle the money and the guilt that came with the money, because all I could think about is, what happened to me wasn't that bad. There are women out there who face way worse types of sexual abuse. What I got was nothing. So why do I deserve a payout? Why do I get justice and a nice check from something that happened to me, when this is sadly so commonplace among women that they never see a cent or any semblance of justice? Just the sheer amount of women who have been through far worse than what I went through. Why don't they get a payout? Why should I? I don't deserve it. It just felt unfair. It felt like I had survivor's guilt, and it just felt like I didn't deserve the money. And so that contributed to the ideas that I just didn't even want the money. And so the next few years I tried to completely block it from my memory and not let it affect me in any way. I slowly became more numb, I got medicated, and I really just let all emotions leave my body, like I couldn't even access them anymore. And over time, I kind of just brushed off this whole thing as, oh, it's just something that happened to me. You know, it's part of my lore, it's part of my character arc. It's not something that affected me, it's just something that happened to me. It's not a life-changing PTSD event that would compile over time into several mental illnesses, but over time I just felt nothing. This was probably one of the toughest story times for me to make, for obvious reasons. And I really waffled for years if I wanted to tell this story. I put it in my drafts of my notes of like, oh, this will make for a good story time. Oh, but I can't share this with strangers on the internet. But I do have a platform, and so much of my platform has become about being open about mental health struggles, because I hear it so often that people look at me and they're like, I wouldn't know you're depressed. You're so bubbly and fun and vibrant. Like, couldn't imagine you going home and being sad. And I couldn't imagine you've had traumatic things happen to you. Like, you don't seem like that type of person. But that's the effect of mental illness, is sometimes you just don't see it, and you don't see the impact that it takes on people's personas. And the hard thing too, that I also have to be open about, is this isn't even the only trauma that I have. And I don't know if I'll ever tell you guys about some of the other traumas, but it felt important to share, and it felt important to let other people out there know that you've been through some shit. We've all been through some shit, but I don't know. I'm sorry that happened to you, to me, to anybody else who's ever had to suffer like this. I tried to hide it away in my psyche. I tried to pretend like nothing happened, and it ended up affecting me over a decade later, where shortly after this experience, I ended up going to a mental health facility for 10 weeks and received 5 life-changing diagnoses. And I'm fully aware that I should have used the money to go get help, to go get a therapist. But hey, I guess I just still hated doctors. But that's gonna be it for this video. But of course, the series doesn't end here, because coming up in the next few episodes, I talk a little bit more about that lawsuit money and how I think I ended up killing my abuser. So stay tuned for that. And also, again, if you are a victim of sexual assault or even domestic violence, I feel for you. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I never know what to say with that. I never know what to say after that, other than I'm sorry and you're not alone. I don't know. I'm gonna leave some links down below in the description box of some anti-sexual abuse organizations if you'd like to donate or just get some more information. And subscribe for future videos, because this series does not end here. It, in fact, gets even crazier, I would say. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to follow me on my other social media platforms, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok while it lasts, though don't even get me started on the politics of TikTok, okay? Blanket statement, you guys, I'm as liberal and progressive as it gets, so if that doesn't vibe with you, maybe don't follow me on social media, because I'm getting heated over there soon. And I do host my own talk show. It's really a dream come true. I write the show, I moderate it, I lead it. There are 3 other hosts with their own specialty, but I have my own talk show now, and It's pretty amazing. So if you wanted to check it out, we go live every other Wednesday, but you can follow me at JC Aaron Hosts so you're up to date on the next time we are going live, so you can tune in and come say hi. But that's gonna be it for me today, you guys. Thank you if you watched all the way to the end, and thank you for hearing me out, because like I said, this just felt important, but I couldn't do it without all of your support. So I thank you guys all so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Toodles!